Well, Justin Trudeau on gun control, Andrew Scheer on cutting and redirecting foreign aid, Jagmeet Singh on affordability promises, and Elizabeth May on free post-secondary tuition for all Canadians and attacking Andrew Scheer today. We're going to talk about all of that with our panel of party commentators. Susan Smith is a Liberal commentator, Kate Harrison is a Conservative commentator, and Robin MacLachlan is an NDP commentator. Good to see you all. Let's start with gun control. And another meeting with the Liberal leader and the mayors of suburban Toronto, around suburban Toronto today. And they all stood up when asked and said, we want a national ban on gun control, not just allowing municipalities to decide whether they want to ban it or not. Is there a danger in being the halfway gun control guy, saying, I can do this, but I'm not prepared to go the whole way in what they're asking for?
I think what Mr. Trudeau has proposed is a reflection of what was heard across the country. So Bill Blair, his former Minister of Crime, I can't even get the right title, but he's a former Chief of Police for Toronto. He's a minister for Trudeau, went across the country listening to municipalities, to mayors, to chiefs of police about what communities wanted from a gun control perspective, or what was reasonable and doable. What they came back with was a ban on assault weapons, and then stricter rules around things like ammunition, gun storage, and this idea, which is new, and it's the first time it's ever come forward, that municipalities would have the ability to ban handguns.
Right. But they keep saying, look at it, so let's say Mississauga bans it and Richmond Hill doesn't. I mean, so what's the point of that?
Well, I suspect that you'll see in big areas like the GTA that you'll have an overall ban that'll come into place. Where the difference is smaller communities where the same types of issues are not the same. And so where the line was that they were looking to do was they didn't want to penalize lawful, legal handgun owners, but they wanted to allow the municipalities to put something in place that made sense for their communities and their realities.
Okay, Kate, what do you think of how they're approaching this? And he's making the point again today that the argument, Conservatives will roll back gun control, Liberals are moving it forward.
Yeah, I've been a bit perplexed by Trudeau's approach to this. I wonder if maybe there's some polling out of Quebec which suggests a more nuanced message around a handgun ban is favorable. I'm not sure, because when I look at the 416 and the 905, to his announcement today, obviously this would be a proposal that some are willing to entertain. So strategically, I'm not quite sure who he thinks he's going to pick up by not going that far and not eating the NDP's lunch a little bit on this. Obviously, the Conservatives have a very different view altogether about this, but we're talking about the strategy behind it. I'm not quite sure where Trudeau thinks he's going to pick up any votes with this sort of middle ground approach.
Robin, what do you think?
It's a really complicated issue. It's a really important issue in urban and suburban Canada, and it's not an issue that's just arisen, though it has gotten worse. This is something the NDP's talked about. It was about a week ago that Jagmeet Singh made an announcement about a $100 million plan to fund youth groups, after-work specials groups, and drop-in centres, because that's what he's heard. And that's where the need is in the communities themselves to make sure that the youth are being provided the opportunities that don't have them direct towards gangs. But of course, the guns themselves are an issue. And it's something that the NDP under Jack Layton in 2008 proposed, which is empowering municipalities to be able to do this. So I think that's a good step. I think that's important. But one of the problems that Trudeau has is that his credibility. He's had 4 years in office, and in 2015 he campaigned promising to spend $100 million, similarly to what Jagmeet Singh proposed this time, but nothing flowed until 2018 when there was something in the budget that promised money to go to the RCMP. So the challenge now, 4 years later, is where's the credibility on suddenly now this is the biggest priority, where you had 4 years where you could have done this.
But again, the issue that keeps coming back, I think, when you listen to trauma doctors saying it needs to be a national ban, you listen to mayors of municipalities saying it needs to be a national ban, is it's the workability thing. I mean, in theory, okay, well, it's back to the some will ban, some may not ban.
Is it the Andrew Scheer approach and don't have any ban at all? And I think that's a big difference for people. That I think that's not for handguns. There's not. And what Trudeau has proposed is the farthest any federal government has ever gone in terms of putting a handgun in place. And the contrast really is with Mr. Scheer and his policies and his pronouncements on those. He literally has the talking points of the gun lobby when it comes to banning assault rifles. And he hasn't spoken out in favor of a handgun ban, and that's a huge contrast between the Liberals and the Conservatives. And I think that's something people will be looking
Justin,
at.
Truly, to make this work, you do need you need cooperation of the province as well. And
I was just about to make this.
He's back hammering on Doug Ford today.
He's got at least 5 premiers who he's going to have a tough he's going to have a tough road to hoe making that argument to begin with, because he can't seem to get cooperation with them. Municipalities are obviously a function of the provinces.
But does he have to, if this is something that you think Canadians want, is greater gun control, do you have to be friends with the premiers who don't want it? I mean, do you just go out and make the case and say, look, then you make the case for not doing it?
Yeah, but you have to do that in between elections. You can't just make the case when you're cynically looking for those votes. It's a really important issue. We're talking about lives here. We're talking about violence and gun violence. And I think using violence as a wedge issue is something that gets a little problematic.
And is that where we are?
That's what he's doing in the 905 right now, for sure. Absolutely, Sue. And we know this. It's an important issue, but we would have liked to have heard about this more over the last 4 years.
Yeah, but we've seen there's been a terrible spike in gun violence across the country, particularly in the big cities. And if Mr. Trudeau had just come forward and dropped a ban without a consultation, without going and looking and speaking to people, people would have been complaining about that as well. I think to your question about the premiers, it'd be very difficult for Doug Ford to campaign against banning handguns when the mayors, everybody else in the big centres, including in Toronto, want something to be done.
That may be the case if there was nothing else. That may be the case if there was nothing else being done and a handgun ban was the only thing that was being proposed. But that's not what the province is doing. That's certainly not what the Conservatives are proposing. The Conservatives are proposing a lot more funding for law enforcement, for guns and gangs units to try and stop the flow between provinces.
Liberals. Yeah, the Liberals are doing all that as well, but the Conservatives aren't doing anything to get guns off the streets.
Okay, let me ask about Andrew Scheer's big announcement today, cutting foreign aid, redirecting it to countries that he says need the money more than some of the countries getting it now, and redirecting it away from countries that are hostile to Canada, Kate. Now we know that this is at least in part how he's going to pay for some of these promises on tax cuts and tax credits. Why is this a good idea?
I think for a lot of Canadians, it's twofold. First would be to find out that we're paying, hundreds of millions of dollars to countries that really are in financial good standing would be surprising to a lot of Canadians. I think that there's been a real lack of oversight and or at least transparency in how these funds have been directed over the last 4 years. I think Canadians may feel that money is better spent partially here at home, but also to countries that need it most. So I think that what the Conservatives propose today is really just a common sense approach to foreign aid spending, given our domestic fiscal situation, but also some of those countries that may need the money a bit more.
Robin, Jagmeet Singh called this a distraction today, saying we have problems with the wealth and too many in too few hands in this country. Why is Andrew Scheer worried about this? We have inequality in this country he should be dealing with. But to this idea, why are we hearing about this now?
Kate's right in that if what Andrew Scheer was saying was true, that would be a common sense approach. The problem is it's not. And it's not like we give money to wealthy countries or wealthy people around the world. Our money is directed towards the most vulnerable, and the money needs to go there. It's actually for our own safety and protection and economic prosperity. So anytime that money flows to a country that may not be a third world country, whether that's China or Russia, or some of the other countries that we may not have good relations with, like Iran, what it's doing is funding programs for women and girls. It's funding programs for women in business, small business. It's funding programs for the rule of law and governance, which is what will help us build a safer world. So just to think about
you're saying when he makes the case that why are we giving money to dictators?
Plus their math doesn't add up.
The country may be run by a dictator, but it's going to the people who need help.
Last year, Canada gave, I think, in U.S. dollars, because there's actually a report that came out on Monday about this, and it's $711 million U.S. dollars. So if we're cutting 25% of that, we're certainly not coming up with the $1.5 billion that some Conservatives have been talking about. What we need to do is actually develop a plan to get to 0.7 of gross national product. That is the commitment made under the Millennium Goals. And the problem is, while the Liberals have redirected money and focused in very important areas like sexual and reproductive health, what they haven't done is had that money keep up with the growth in our economy.
We're at about 0.28.
Which is less as a share of GNP than under Stephen Harper. And that's important to note.
Okay, Susan?
So I think Mr. Scheer's policy pronouncements or foreign policy pronouncements today are kind of symptomatic of his complete inexperience on the foreign policy scene. This is the guy who, was practically wearing a T-shirt. I supported Brexit before Brexit was cool, and he's barely walked that position back. He hasn't been able to address that. He also is the guy, from a foreign policy perspective, was yelling at Justin Trudeau to, kowtow to what Mr. Trump wanted on NAFTA negotiations. And so there's a naivete about Mr. Scheer's approach to foreign policy. He doesn't understand it. He doesn't get it. When to Robin's point, and Robin's bang on, the funds that we dispense as a country or distribute as a country go to organizations like UNICEF and Care Canada and other on the Red Cross and other on-the-ground
But he's
groups
not- he's
that
not
help
talking
people. They
about
don't
cutting
go to
those, are
wealthy
they?
dictators.
He's not
and things
talking
like
about
that.
cutting that.
No, but he hasn't said where it's going to come from. He hasn't said where it's going to. He doesn't know. He's just said writ large. We're going to chop. We're going to take the axe
There are more
chop
questions
it.
to be asked here. He's saying, it's not anybody that's getting money now in those programs will continue to get the money. It's a question of which countries those programs are in that may not continue.
Well, it means
to get
they
it,
might
right?
not get the money
right.
then.
In those
right?
countries
and I mean,
that
he
he
said we're
thinks
going
are
to continue
hostile.
to support,
or
maybe
that he
wear a
thinks are
t-shirt
doing
for
better
them,
than
but-
other countries that need the money more.
Yeah, it'd be good if there was a little more detail. It'd be helpful if there was a platform that was fully
That's
costed.
the
We'd know a
same
little bit
thing
more.
that could be said of any campaign promise that's been made so far. Is where are the details? If only we had the Prime Minister willing to participate in a debate on foreign policy, then we might be able to
Well,
talk
the Prime
about some of these
Minister will
issues.
see him in a debate.
Yeah, it was the
he'll
debate.
see him in a debate on
the monk
Thursday
debate was supposed
night.
to be tonight, but it's not. We know that. But there is a TVA debate tomorrow in French. What's the importance? What do you think we'll see in that debate? It is a French language debate, so. I'm going to say not only to a French audience, but it's really important to an audience of voters in Quebec and Francophone voters across the country. What do you think we watch for, Robin?
Well, we'll see a Prime Minister for the first time, which is nice and important. It's very important. And the reason the Prime Minister cherry-picked this one as the only one in addition to the two official debates that he's going to do is states the importance of the Francophone vote in Quebec. And TVA, of course, being the largest network in Quebec, a Francophone network. And Liberals have started the campaign in a strong position in Quebec, but actually among Francophones, it's the Bloc Québécois who's been gaining and has the most momentum. So this will be the first debate also with the Bloc Québécois leader on the stage. It'll also be the first time that a great many Quebecers are going to see someone in a turban running leading a national party and running to be Prime Minister in the only province that has legislated discrimination in terms of what someone can wear if they work for the government. So I'm really interested to see how Mr. Singh performs in the debate. He's got impeccable French. He did quite well in Tout le monde en parle, but I think expectations are probably still running fairly low for him, given the fact that this is the first time he's participated in a French language debate.
Kate, what's the challenge for Andrew Scheer?
I think standing out, of course, amongst Maxime Bernier and the Bloc Québécois, there's so many votes at play there. It's going to be important for him to really make an impact in the French language debate. For the last year and a half, the Conservatives have been focusing quite a bit on their prospects in Quebec. Obviously, we see from public opinion data that hasn't really come to fruition for them in a real way. So are they going to play to some more of those kind of rural issues that are important, where they actually have a chance at gaining some seats? It's going to be a really, really important debate for Andrew Scheer.
We expect to see Justin Trudeau on the firing line tomorrow. What's the challenge for him?
That's right. He will have every other leader with their sights trained on him. So he will be defending his record and outlining his vision and comparing and contrasting himself in particular to Mr. Scheer. From a strategic perspective, I think what's going to be very interesting is Mr. Scheer in the debate itself. Mr. Trudeau knows who's coming at him. It's everybody. But Mr. Scheer as well has got to defend his far-right flank against Max Bernier, who has nothing to. Oh no, he's not in the debate.
He's not in the
He's
debate.
not in the debate, but people will be making.
He's not in the debate, but-
Sorry, excuse me. They'll be making accusations to him, pushing him on that. I think on Bill 21 and other things. He's going to be trying to demonstrate his right-wing credentials and keep those people happy, while at the same time trying to keep the progressives in.
I want you to hear Elizabeth May today. She was talking about Andrew Scheer's, CV, I guess, before he got into politics, and minimizing the significance of it, and also raising questions about his use of the office of the Speaker as a politician. Let's listen to what she had to say, and we'll come back.
And it was quite wrong of Andrew to be Speaker of the House and then go back into partisan politics at all. But it's now quite clear that he used the office of Speaker and even held meetings at the Speaker's residence to start planning his bid for Conservative Party leadership. This is an aspect of what he did as a parliamentarian that hasn't received much examination, but I think he's done permanent damage to the respect of the office of Speaker.
Kate, let me start with you. People have had lots to say about Andrew Scheer's life as an insurance broker or not, where he got his university degree or not, Regina or Ottawa.
Yeah.
What about this?
This is a bit confounding to me for a couple of reasons. All speakers are partisan, so it's not as though Andrew Scheer is the first person to ever be an elected, partisan member and then seek the office of Speaker. I find this whole kind of debate a bit of a race to the bottom, to be honest, in terms of your credentials and your background, and like, it's all fair game, but I wonder who Elizabeth May is playing to. I think she's probably trying to play up that ethical leader side. She performs very well on ethics in terms of polling. Maybe she's seeing those numbers dip a bit, or she's trying to land some punches for votes in BC. But I wonder if she maybe doesn't have her eyes on the right target here.
Susan, what about this?
Well, it was an interesting news conference. Certainly, when she was going after Andrew Scheer's, I think she called it his thin resume. It is interesting that Mr. Scheer is the first speaker, I think, in living memory who's gone from the chair to then the opposition leader's chair. There's a big difference between just going back to being an ordinary backbencher, but going on to the offensive there. So that's kind of interesting. It's worth some contemplation. I think overall, you know, the Conservatives there's a term they like to use. They like to say not as advertised, and maybe Mr. Scheer is just living up to that moniker.
Robin?
Look, if Elizabeth May has any allegations with foundation about him having used public office position, you know, in a way that contravenes the Elections Act, then that's serious. I couldn't say whether or not that's true at all. I don't think it's fair to say that because that he shouldn't have gone from the Speaker's chair to back into partisan politics. I mean, anybody who's a Speaker is a member of Parliament and also has to get re-elected. There's not much of a difference there.
You're out knocking at doors saying, elect our guys, elect our party.
But I also think Elizabeth May, she knows a lot about procedure. She knows a lot about a lot of these technical issues. The elections is never really the time that gets a lot of play in a way that Canadians understand it. So she would have to have something quite founded.
She also suggested he was kind of a lifelong politician.
She really is.
She's not, well, okay, but in this
hang on,
if she told a young candidate, she told a young candidate today, a 19-year-old Green candidate, look, you should serve 2 terms and get out and get other life experience. She's been the leader of the party since 2006 and elected in 2011.
And she was working for the Conservative Party.
So
back when Brian
she's
Mulroney
had
was
2
Prime
terms.
Minister,
Should she get out?
Well, she could. That's up to her to decide. But I don't think you could call Liz May a career politician, and that is what Andrew Scheer is. You can't dispute that.
Okay. All right. Thank you all. Great to talk to you.
Thanks,
Peter.
Thank
Talk
you.
again.